Hi, I'm Gabriel Napora. I'm a film producer and financier. I've won the Toronto International Film Festival, the Sundance Film Festival. I've had the #1 documentary in the world. I've worked with talent such as Leonardo DiCaprio, Vin Diesel, and The Rock. And on today's show, we're going to talk about how movies impact and influence leaders in leadership. We're going to talk about how we have a responsibility to stop rewarding mediocrity. And we're also going to talk about how leaders have a responsibility to tell stories that are deeply emotional and human. I'm very excited to talk to you all. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with award-winning film producer and financier Gabriel Napora. His movies have won festivals like the Toronto Film Festival and the Sundance Film Festival. He has worked with, alongside people like Leonardo DiCaprio, The Rock, and he's committed to, him and his company are committed to creating relevant films and documentaries that make people think. So, Gabriel, before when we finished, we were talking about, of course, movies, and we were talking about emotion, and we're talking about the really great storytelling is an emotional process. What's a movie that really impacted you? You know, again, it might not have, the most impactful movie, it may not have been in the industry. It might have been while you were in business. It might have been while you were in high school, you know, or whatever. What's a movie that really sort of reached out and grabbed you by the, let's say, by the heart? We'll
There's
go with that.
there's so many, but I mean the one that stands out for me is the Shawshank Redemption. And
Really?
it is, yeah. That's been my favorite film. Oh man, since I was a kid. You know, I think the film came out in '93. Um, for people who don't know it, it's a film about a guy who probably wrongly goes to jail
Mm-hmm.
and still in the like worst of conditions in the world can still find hope. And the message in that movie, I mean, it actually, having been through hard times and having been through, you know, difficulties and even depression, it, there's no movie that hits me as hard as that one. Like that one just really, really, really hits home. It's such a beautiful message of hope that everybody should see it.
So when you saw that movie, what did you see? You know, because I said before that people see different movies, right? And
Right.
it's one of the things I absolutely love about movies. I'm a movie buff, but it's one of the things I love about movies is two people can see the same film and not see the same film. I know I've been to movies with my wife and two other friends, and we've left and we've gotten in the car, and they're like, God, I hated that film. And I'm like, oh, I loved it. I can think of a particular movie that I was like, I loved it. And I'm like, what? It was terrible. And I go, no, it was fantastic. And they go, how can you say that? I loved it. And they go, I didn't even know what it was about.
Right.
So what was Shawshank for you? What was that,
Shawshank,
if it, on a personal level, what was that story for you? What was it saying to you?
this the story for me, I think I would break down in the sentence that no matter how difficult or dark your scenario, there's always hope. And there's always a light at the end of the tunnel, no matter how dark things get. And I think, you know, for a lot of people, because there's like especially in the world today, how depressed people get and how dark things get, having that message is just as pertinent today as it would have been, you know, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Um, just such a beautiful message of hope for me. And I think I would encourage anybody to watch that film. To me, it's maybe the only perfect film I've ever seen
Hmm.
that I think is legitimately perfect. And maybe that's my own, you know, thematic take on it, but I just think it's so beautifully done. And I think especially today, the message is absolutely key.
Would you be willing to tell us a little bit about that darkness for you? Because you said, you know, that you have gone through that hopelessness, that darkness. And I think that, um, you know, I've talked about this many times, that we live in a social media world where everybody's life is freaking perfect, but
Yeah.
it's not. And, you know, we look at the, uh, the movie stars, we look at the pop stars, we look at the Instagram influencers, we look at the Hollywood people, and we go, oh, their life is perfect. And if I had that, I'd be so happy. And the truth is, that's not the case. That everybody, as you said, has their own darkness, their own shadow that they've battled with. Can you tell us a little bit about what that journey has been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just being honest and upfront, there's been certain times in my life where I have found depression and I have found hopelessness and just a feeling that nothing is ever going to get better. I think we all go through it at some time or other. And in my personal case, I had a sister who's schizophrenic, and I think that made it very difficult growing up in a house, because schizophrenia is it's a very, very challenging disease to live with, especially when you're young and you don't really understand it, and it kind of comes about. I think also, in high school, I was a very, very awkward and lonely kid. I wasn't very social. I was like incredibly introverted. So going through that as well, where you're not really connecting to people and not able to, make friends or anything like that, I think often leads to like a form of depression as well. And I found myself in that. The biggest one for me, beyond those things as a kid, within this industry, there's sometimes a lot of bad people, sometimes really, really bad people. And you're inevitably going to run into them. And sadly, in 2011, I ran into one who sort of, the short version of it is stole a lot of money. And after that, like when you believe, you have a hypothesis that the world is a certain way and that you can trust and that people are inherently good, and then that just gets completely shifted on its side, and not all people are good, and there are some very, very bad people. That took me down for about 2 or 3 years in my career, where my career was headed in a very upward spiral, and really, I felt like destroyed me for a long time. So bouncing back from that, and even the film we're talking about, Shawshank Redemption, and just having that in your head, that there's always hope, and there's always a way, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel, gets you through some pretty dark moments. And I think it's our job as filmmakers to inspire that sort of emotion so that people can get through terrible things.
And again, though, the challenge that, thank you for sharing your own vulnerability around that. I appreciate it. And but the challenge is, for me personally, I'm generally prefer, from a content of story, I generally prefer more European films over American films, because there is a Hollywood ending, and so yes, there is the two guys who escaped from jail and are sitting on a Mexican beach. Life isn't that. Life is something else. Life is something that, it's not one and done. And I think that a lot of times, and I respect and understand the limits of how much story you can tell in a movie. I've often said that the most talented people in the movie are the ones who get the least amount of respect, and they're the editors, because I have no idea how they do it. I have no idea. I watch a movie or a TV show, and I honestly, it's a regular thing for me. I often think, how did you tie 5 storylines together, make them coherent, leave nothing open in that period of time, and do it so well? And if you didn't, I certainly bloody noticed, right? So, and these Hollywood endings also become this mislead, because if you dealt with growing up in an environment with a sister who had schizophrenia and the upheaval that would cause in a family dynamic, feeling like an outsider at school, and the early depression of that, and then depression of whatever it is, we begin to see that this is not a one and done, that these are things that are reoccurring themes in our lives. And I think it's great that we can watch Shawshank Redemption and feel hope. Yes, absolutely. But let's not forget that you're going to go another round. And if you don't understand how to deal with that next round, and by the way, the last round has given you some background, but it's not giving you the way to deal with it. It's giving you an understanding, but not a way to deal with it. And people go, well, I went through this, so I can do that. Bullshit. Bullshit. When I look at my childhood and what I went through, yeah, it gave me a lot, but it didn't give me the skills for dealing with it. It gave me a way to get through it. Getting through it and being better from it are vastly different things, right? So it's very interesting to me that when, because I am highly influenced by storytelling. I teach storytelling. I teach the arc. I tell them how it works. I understand, Campbell's model of the hero's journey very, very well. I teach people how to speak so they can deliver that. And in the crux of that, part of that storytelling is I have to say, you have a social responsibility here to say this is not a solution. This is my solution that worked for me at this time, but it might not later. And so when you look at that, do you think that that is evolving in storytelling, or do you think it's getting simpler? Because movies, and I talked about at the break, movies are changing. So, we all used to love going to the cinema, and then COVID came. And then we started watching things on streaming. We bought bigger TV screens and we stayed home to watch them. And people are returning to the movies, but not in the same way, not by any stroke of the imagination. And what do we know is that a movie length, we talked about The Godfather in the first part, was almost 3 hours long. Average movie's about 90 minutes. But what do we know about movies in the context of generations? A movie length feature is 24 minutes for a millennial and is 12 minutes for a Gen Z. 12 minutes. You got to do a full story arc in 12 minutes. Talk to us about trying to, because we talked about all this social relevance and the impact and delivering emotion. Talk to us about the changing landscape of shows when you're looking at this attention problem.
Well, I think what destroys me the most about my industry, and it certainly is generational, I think to some extent, but I do feel like storytelling is getting worse. Maybe that's the old man in me starting to talk, like as you get older, it's like you start.
It'll never be good as it was, lad.
Exactly. But I do feel like storytelling is inherently getting worse. I think part of that is trying to cater to, the younger generation that does have a lot less attention span than the older generation. But I also think for some reason, scripts are getting worse. Like it's very, very rare for us now to see a script that really blows us away. It's very rare for us to see a movie, I think, that blows us away. And I think part of that is, my take on it is mediocrity in society is being rewarded a lot more. Like you get rewarded for just being okay at something instead of for being exceptional at something. I think that's also a bit of a generational thing. And I think that's very, very sad.
Here's your ribbon for showing up.
Yeah, here's your ribbon for showing up. You get the participation award. And I think if you look at films now too, because there's so many streaming services and there's so much demand for content, there's garbage being created because people aren't taking the time to really think through things and really think, what is the message I really want to convey? And hey, if you want to just create content for the sake of content, sure, people are going to probably still watch that. But I think if you want to change the world and if you want to do something that's actually meaningful, that's actually different, you really have to think about what you're doing. You have to take moments and really think about, is this giving me the emotion that I want to give to other people? It takes a mindfulness, honestly. And I don't think that exists as much anymore.
But now we're full circle because we're back to this thing about the business, right? How do we get the Gen Z, the millennials to watch the show? Well, it can't be longer than 24 minutes, right? But we also want to change the world and we want to deliver impact. How do we do that? You know, I mean, this is like, for me, when I look at that, I go, you know, that is a movie maker's dilemma. Because when I look at, like, one of my books is called Don't Read This, Your Ego Won't Like It. That book is almost 500 pages. I might as well use that book as kindling. Like, there's no way in the world I could sell that book today. I mean, it was, you know, it was a long time ago when I wrote it, but, you know, people read in those days. Now, what do we know? We know that if a book is 200 pages, the average person will read the first 3 chapters. No, nothing more.
Wow.
They'll use the first 3 chapters and then they'll skip to the end and see what it's about. That's what we know. That's statistics. So what do we know? There's that the book really needs to be 3 chapters in length. What is 3 chapters in length? 75 to 80 pages. That's terrible. I don't want to write that book, but I want to make sure that I'm getting my message across. And this is what I'm saying before, Gabriel. The interesting thing about that is the value of editing, whether it's in a book or in a movie, is like, how do you take this monumental thing and turn it into something cohesive? Like, can you tell us a little, do you have a story or experience of that? Of having something that is monstrous and magnificent, because oftentimes that's what it is. It's magnificent because it's monstrous because it's magnificent. And then you go, yeah, but we got to sell it to the public. And they're not going to sit there for 4.5 hours watching this epic.
Absolutely. I mean, I think having worked on a lot of different films and documentaries, especially on documentaries, you get so much footage. Like, you get an impossible amount of footage. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in working with directors hold things very precious to them.
Of course.
That I want this, I want that. Like, you even look at somebody like, let's say, Martin Scorsese, you know, some of his films being 3.5 hours to almost 4 hours long. Most people aren't going to sit through that. You're exactly right. And I think, you know, it's the job of not only the editor to bring it to a cohesive area, but to the producers and executive producers to make sure what they put in the marketplace is something that's marketable and people are going to watch. In the case of us, we've had, you know, several different projects. It's tough for me to name because I don't want to, you know, create any conflict, but several different projects where we clash with the director to say, well, you can't have this film as being 2 hours to 2.5 hours. Nobody is simply going to watch it. And then we have to go into the editing room and we have to cut the things that are precious, even if we like them, to get it down to a manageable level that people will, you know, be able to watch. But, you know, at the same time, and Dov, I'm curious of your opinion on this, catering to groups that can only handle a certain amount of length of content may also not be making the world a better place in itself. Because, like you said, you know, you can do an 80-page book, but that's not going to make the book good. And maybe people will buy it, and maybe it has the basis of your message, but you're not necessarily giving the message that you really want to put out. So even if you're not getting the amount of sales that you want from that, like, isn't it, I'm curious what you think, isn't it more important to put out the message that's really deep and meaningful to you?
I think it is. But I think that what I have to do is I have to create something that creates an appetite. So that's the message. So when I think about The Matrix and the guy, the Walensky's, they started out with a 7-minute movie, right? That was not The Matrix, but that created the appetizer, you know, that created this phenomenon that was The Matrix. And I think, like, so for instance, I'm on Instagram. Do I like Instagram? No. I see how addictive, how dopamine driving it is, and it's difficult to put it down because of that. But as a content delivery place, I hate it. But I'm on there for one simple reason. And the reason is I want to learn the discipline of delivering my message in 1 minute max. And now that's actually 15 seconds. So how do I deliver a message in 15 seconds? And I go on and I watch other content providers. Of course, they're idiots doing shit that I don't care about and really has no meaning whatsoever. And then I watch these people who are bloody magnificent at it. And I know that they've scripted and they've edited and they've spent probably something like 30, 40 hours to get to a 45-second video that is superbly done. And I'm like, wow. So I have respect for the editing process again. And I'm looking at how do I get the appetizer so delicious that they want the main course. And so for me, I just delivered a video that was called Get Knocked Down 7, Get Up 8, right? Which is a very common themed message in motivational. And I said, it's terrible advice. Please don't follow it. It's terrible advice. If you get knocked down 7 times and you get up 8, you're dumb. How do I know? Because I was really dumb. I would get knocked down and I prided myself on getting up. That's not the answer. The answer is get knocked down once, stay down and go, why the hell am I on my ass? What do I need to learn? And so it was like, that was a 15-minute video. And then I went, I didn't edit it or anything because I don't do that. I was like, okay, how do I deliver this message in 1 minute? And that's what I did. I delivered it in 1 minute. So is it my content? No. Is it a simple message that gets people attracted? Yes. The challenge with now the main courses are getting smaller. To me, it's not the problem that the appetizer has a certain size to it, because if I go to a restaurant, I don't want a pasta bowl. I want an appetizer. That's fine. It's the appetizer. But I also want to make sure that I'm not leaving hungry. Right. So if I'm, if it's all Nouvelle Cuisine and I'm leaving with these tiny little tasters, there's a good bit missing. And that's my concern with it is, okay, as we get to this micro content, 15, 30 a minute, as the main course also now become 2 minutes.
Right.
As opposed to 2 hours or in depth. And problem with that for me, and this is why we're talking about movies, is then we're living in the shallow. We don't go to the depth of emotion. We go to the easy emotion, the easy knee-jerk emotion, which is I'm pissed off with them, the enemy, or I'm in love with this, rather than making us think. And I don't know that you can make people think about two sides of something in a short period of time. I think it's important to think about two sides of something. I'm very pro, and I'm going to be controversial here, I'm very pro trans rights. Absolutely pro trans rights, right? Am I okay with Disney making movies that are a love story about a trans person who is 12? I'm not. I'm sorry, I'm not. And I know that's going to piss a lot of people off, but I'm not. Because I can remember being 16 and getting married and taking my mom to court to get married, and won the case. And when I look at that, as a mature individual, I go, I was just rebelling. I didn't want to get married. I was just rebelling.
Right.
And as a result, I caused a lot of pain for myself and for others. And here's the truth that I think about human beings. And this is why I think movies are my favorite. One of my favorite movies is Syriana. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know that movie. Yeah. It's a great movie because it's not either or. Mm-hmm. It's gray. Is the CIA good? Don't know. We watched that movie, maybe not. Are the Middle Eastern sheikhs and those guys all for keeping fossil fuels? Yeah, unless you watch the movie and you go, well, maybe not. Is every suicide bomber a crazy fundamentalist Muslim? Yeah. Watch the movie. And then you go, well, maybe there's another motivation. Like for me, this is the key, is like great entertainment should make us think of two sides, not one.
Mhm.
And I think that that's where it gets lazy for me. It gets lazy. And so as a result, we don't look at two sides. So that's why to answer your question in a very long way, that's what I think the answer is my concern is not in whether I've got to provide an 80-page book. My problem is if that 80-page book now requires me to deliver a 40-page book, and then a 20-page book, and then a 10-page book, because that's not a book. And so do you ever get to depth? And I think we'll get to a point where people will go, this is horseshit, and we got to get deeper. But I don't know how long that will take, or I don't know not necessarily how long, but what it will take. Meaning, I know because of what I do for a living and my background and my training, that most people don't change until it's painful enough. I put a thing up on Instagram yesterday that said, "You're not stupid, but your commitment to staying the same and not asking for help makes you look that way." Right? It's our own ego that gets in the way. Says, I don't need help. Okay. You don't need a coach? Nope. Okay, good. How's your life going? Oh, it's fantastic. Really? When you're alone at night in bed, is it? Are you really leading the way you want to lead? Are you really doing what you want to do? Are you going to feel fulfilled when you pass? That's a whole different story.
Yeah, I think you've got a lot of really good points there. I think, the one thing that resonated with me when you're talking about two sides of the story is really making everyone human, especially in movies and films, TV series, all of that sort of stuff. And that rings true to emotions as well. Like people can tell when something isn't real and when it is real, and when it's coming from a good place, as opposed to when you're just doing something without any thought and it's superficial and it's for money. And I think humanizing people, even let's say the bad guys in stories, or whatever side, where like you're talking about Syriana, where you see not everything is black and white. I mean, most things aren't black and white. Almost everything is some form of gray.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really our responsibility as filmmakers, is to make people think that way. And I do think it's lazy filmmaking and lazy storytelling when you aren't thinking about, when you aren't bringing truth to life, when you're not bringing true characters, true messages, and true themes. The other thing, that I think really resonated that you said with me is nothing is clean. Like you have Hollywood endings that are happy, and maybe you got through this particular challenge, but now you're going to get hit with something else.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to come at you the same way. It's always going to evolve, and it's always going to be different. That's very difficult to do, mind you, in a 2-hour film where you're trying to say one message. I think you can do that a little bit easier in TV series. But I think in real life, that's very much the case. Nothing is simple. Nothing comes easy necessarily. Everything takes work, and you're going to be hit with a million different things, and you just have to, deal with them.
Well, this is the interesting contradiction, is that the attention span is brutally low, and yet people binge watch 10 hours of a series. And oftentimes those people are the same people. I don't want to watch this video on YouTube. It's 7 minutes long. I don't have 7 minutes.
Right.
But I'll binge watch this TV show. And one of the things that I mean, you probably know this as well as I do, like the number one themed podcast over the pandemic was true crime. True crime, unsolved crimes, serial killers, etc. thing. And people were binge watching that and binging podcasts on that. And it's very interesting to me as a contradiction. And I want to put this forward to you as a movie maker and ask you, because one of the things that, as somebody who is a student of history and psychology, as well as a massive movie fan, is the rise of the anti-hero.
Mm-hmm.
The rise of the anti-hero, I'm really interested in where that has gone and where it will go. We can think back, you and I, to times of Clint Eastwood as Dirty Harry, or Travis Bickle, Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver, or Michael Corleone in The Godfather, or in more modern times, you've got Walter White, you've got Saul Goodman, you've got Marty and Wendy Bird in Ozark, Villanelle in Killing Eve, and even more extreme like Tony Soprano or Dexter.
Mhm.
Do you understand that? What's your feelings on that from the movie industry point of view of this anti-hero thing?
Well, I think I certainly understand it, because if you look at anti-hero, you could certainly make the argument the anti-heroes are in a certain sense the only true heroes, because they actually show the humanity that sort of exists. Like, there's nobody that I know, I don't know if you know anybody, but I don't know anybody that's perfect, regardless of whether you're a hero or not. People have a gray area in them no matter what, and at times may do heroic things. I think the thing about anti-heroes is they're the most honest. Like, if I look at movies that I really loved, for instance, The Crow, who to me is in a certain sense the ultimate anti-hero.
Yeah.
He gets killed and then kind of goes on a sort of vengeance spree, but for the woman he loved. That always appealed to me. I think Batman too, who sort of maybe exists in a little bit of a gray area, as
Absolutely.
probably being much more popular than, let's say, Superman, who is in a certain sense typically portrayed as the perfect person.
Hmm.
And I think we all deep down know there's no such thing. I mean, it may be something to aspire to, to try and be the best you can be and the best you can be morally, but we all exist in that gray area. And I think that's why anti-heroes really appeal to us, is there's an honesty there, like a truth there that doesn't exist on the other side. But looking at it from the other point of view as well, when there's too much, I'm going to use the word immorality in the world, as humans, we do kind of then crave a little bit to see that moral person. So right now, let's say, I think there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of bad things happening, all sorts of things. Wholesome movies are selling incredibly well. And I'm not saying that wholesome movies are necessarily always the most honest. They might be,
No.
or they might not be in certain cases, but they certainly make somebody feel good inside, because you're escaping from the immorality that exists in the world today too. So there's both sides to it, really, in my
So
opinion.
that's very interesting. Thank you for that, Gabriel. So the very interesting is that the rise of the anti-hero with a, shall we say, a faulty or broken moral compass. Walter White as the great example, who is a guy who is bullied and and then becomes a ruthless killer. Um, you know, is not somebody with a faulty compass. He becomes his own shadow. There's a line in that show where he keeps saying to his wife, "I just did it all for the family, and it did it for us," and blah blah blah. And at one point, close to the very end of the season of the series, she says, "If you tell me you did it for us one more time, I'll scream." And he said, "I didn't. I did it for me. It felt good. I felt good to have power." And I think that hopelessness that people feel, that powerlessness that people feel, that pull to having that power is seductive,
Mhm.
but it often requires the abandonment of the moral compass. And I think that for the most of us, we want to see this redemption moment where the character is pulled back in some way to going, oh, I can't be that. I did what I was here to do. I have to now live with that, but there's something else that I've got to go to, and so I love what you were saying about the other side of that, which is that we're also pulled to the peaches and cream, Hollywood wholesome movies about nice people in a nice town who do nice things. The Good Witch is one that my wife watches, right? She likes that. And I said, "Isn't this bullshit?" Like, she's really deep. And she goes, "Oh yeah, but it's just every now and then," she goes, "I just need this."
Mhm.
And I think that that's Interesting. So when to sort of draw this all into a conclusion now, when we bring this into the conclusion of storytelling for leaders,
Mhm.
what is our responsibility when if you were standing in front of a Fortune 500 audience, or not necessarily of a company, but of people from Fortune 500 companies who were all managers and leaders, etc., VPs, and you said your responsibility in the context of storytelling is, what would you say?
I would say it's ultimately several things. One, it's the truth, and it's your truth. Like it's really distilling down that when you're telling your story that you really believe in it. And I think as well as that, understanding how story works and understanding that regardless of whether you're in my industry or not, as a leader, and we all use storytelling, you're inevitably going to be using storytelling. If you want to get what you want to get across, emotion, and actually feeling that emotion and conveying that emotion to other people is really how we connect. We connect as humans in that way. We do it in film, which maybe reaches in some ways a broader audience. But if you're the CEO of that company, you can still have just as profound an impact by telling a truthful story that conveys emotion and really goes through the right details and everything in the same way to get what you need done across or whatever you're trying to do. So I think it's regardless of whether you're in film or you're a CEO of a company, I think storytelling is key to everything. I think it's really human connection. It's humanity.
Yeah, thank you.
Storytelling really is humanity.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's a very important piece. One of the things that I teach the people I teach to speak is that when you tell a story, you immediately fire off a cinema in somebody's head. They start to picture and experience what it is that story you're telling them. But your job is to move them into a multiplex
Mhm.
where the story you're telling them is showing in that cinema until they have an emotional connection to it, and that emotional connection pulls them into their story.
So true.
And
Yeah.
even though the story's not the same, the emotional connection is.
Yeah.
And that is your job. That is how you bond people to the brand. That is how you bond people to you, to the leader, to the organization, to the customer. Like, what is our story? And the most brilliant brands in the world, whether you like McDonald's or whether you like Coca-Cola or not, are masterful storytellers. And
Yeah.
this is what we all need to learn in business, is that storytelling and business are one and the same thing. And
Yeah.
if you can't convey that emotion, you're going to fail. You are
So
going
true.
to fail. I
Yeah.
just as a quick conclusion, I bought my wife a personal air conditioner, like a little box like this, for in her office. It's a piece of shit. I'm sending it back tomorrow. It's a piece of absolute shit. It's terrible. It doesn't do anything, but it was a fantastic story. When I saw the ad was pretty good. And then I watched a 3-minute video about how it was made and how this kid was at college and he's challenged the industry. And I bought it for the story. And I'm a storyteller.
Yeah.
I bought it for the story. Stories work even on people who understand story. So this is why it's so important. And I bought a piece of shit. Yes, I'll ship it back, but I wonder how many people will. Because most people like me, they go, I can't be bothered sending it back.
It's true.
I can't be bothered. I'm going to do it, but I can't generally be bothered with that. I don't have
Right.
time. So thank you for sharing all this. It's been very insightful, and there's a lot to go through for everybody. Again, I want to encourage people to reach out to you. So if you could please just let everybody know how they can find out more about you and about your organization and all the
Yeah.
resources that you have, that would be great.
Absolutely. Electricpandaentertainment.com. You can also find, if you want to see what work I've done, you can go on Internet Movie Database, imdb.com, and type in my name. And if you just Google me, you'll see other podcasts, speeches, all sorts of stuff like that.
Fabulous. Again, thank you, Gabriel. It's been a pleasure and an honor. And for you, dear listener, remember you can hang out with other conscious leaders. You can chat about this episode or any previous episodes inside of our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Remember that those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of the tribe. That meaning is often conveyed through story. Business and political leaders who are committed to positively shaping the political and business landscape know they must tap into what drives human behavior, and that is meaning. You can tap into the groundbreaking understanding of how to apply the anatomy of meaning that's extracted from the emotional source code of individuals, organizations, and even nations for better ways to understand business profiling, deception detection, criminal profiling, persuasion, and influence techniques. I'm Dov Barron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness the emotional source code to move their tribe, because unified, actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about the stories that are impacting you and the stories you're sharing that are impacting others, because they are. I'm Dov Barron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.